Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
There's only one country that can rival the United States when it comes to the reported body counts of murderers: Russia, which has the second most prolific serial killers in the world. The first one, of course, being the United States, and I'm not going to delve deep into the statistics right now, maybe in a future episode, but just know that it's disturbing for those of us that live here, because we're ahead of all other countries in terms of numbers of serial killers, and it's not even close. It's not even close. But today, our focus is Russia. And because I'm not Russian and can just barely pronounce some of the American names and places, please know that I mean no disrespect by the way that I will inevitably wreck some of these Russian names. So here we go. Cherepovets, a city in northwest Russia, sits in the shadow of one of the country's largest steel mills. It contains pockets of wasteland with half-demolished buildings left abandoned because of legal issues. Throughout the day, smoke from the steel plant's chimney covers the entire sky. In 2004, Cherepovets became the perfect place for a serial killer to hunt undetected. The first girl went missing in February of 2004. Marina Ostrovskaya was 17 years old, and she had plans to meet up with her boyfriend's parents on the evening of February 4th. During her walk to their house, Marina took a shortcut, walking through an empty lot on Danilovsky Street. She never walked out to the other side. When Marina failed to come home that evening, her parents called the police, who then searched the area. The initial search uncovered no sign of a missing girl. In the middle of the afternoon, in broad daylight, it was as if she vanished into thin air. 6 months later, a body was found in Cherepovets, but it did not belong to Marina. Instead, the remains were identified as belonging to a 19-year-old student named Irina Popova. Irina had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death before her body was dumped out in the open. Her murderer had made no efforts to bury or cover the body, leading to the quick discovery of the crime. The following month, a second body was dumped a few miles away from Irina's, a 22-year-old university student, Tatiana Beva. She had gone missing while walking home from a club. Like before, Tatiana had also been sexually assaulted and strangled. There wasn't enough evidence to confidently draw a connection between the two cases, but the police were suspicious at the similarities. Their suspicions were confirmed 3 months later when the body of a third girl, 17-year-old Tatiana Maskamova, was found in a vacant lot. Though Tatiana had been killed in the same way as the previous victims, it seemed as if the killer was evolving. While the first two bodies had been left entirely in the open, Tatiana's body had been covered with a layer of snow, dirt, and leaves. Less than a mile away from the crime scene, investigators found a garrote, which had been handmade from 2 sticks and a piece of cable. The DNA on the garrote matched Tatiana Maskamova, and for the first time, police had found a murder weapon. It suggested that the killer hadn't just changed the way he disposed of his victims, he had also changed where he killed them. The first 2 victims had been abducted, killed, and then dumped in a separate location. It seems that Tatiana had been killed very close to where her body was found. Knowing that they were now dealing with a serial killer, investigators braced themselves for another abduction and murder. But it didn't come. Instead, the killer took some time off, leaving the authorities to sweat before he returned 6 months later. On the 26th of June 2005, a lady planned to meet up with a friend at 1 p.m. This lady's name is very hard to pronounce, but I'm going to give it a shot. Lyudmila Maroshenko. And there's a 0% chance that that's correct. But Lyudmila, she never showed up to this 1 p.m. meeting, and the friend was worried when she didn't answer the phone. She reported her missing, and almost immediately the authorities came to the conclusion that Lyudmila may have been abducted by the serial killer who had now been nicknamed the Danilovsky Maniac. At this point in the investigation, investigators had not located any eyewitnesses. They had no idea what the killer looked like. It was as if they were searching for a ghost. In July of 2005, they found their first eyewitness, Svetlana Stepanova. She had been walking by a river with her sister and one of her friends when she'd stopped to tie up her shoe. Her companions kept walking, but within minutes, they heard a scream and turned back to see if Svetlana was okay. But there was no sign of her, apart from her swimsuit and a bag left abandoned on the ground. Svetlana's sister and friend searched through the bushes and saw her lying on the ground in only her underwear. Her throat had been cut so recently that it was still gushing with blood. Her killer was standing over her, and when the two witnesses screamed, he took off. But because of the trauma of seeing Svetlana's body, the two girls could not remember much about the man's appearance. However, Svetlana's murder provided the police with a new area that needed to be searched. They combed through the wasteland where Svetlana had been killed, and eventually they reached the half-demolished building that had once been the District Department of Internal Affairs. The building's underground parking garage had been left untouched, and when investigators walked inside, they knew that they had found exactly what they had been searching for. This was the Danilovsky Maniac's lair. The cinder block walls had been covered with crudely drawn pornographic images in black chalk, and nearby there was a pit full of car tires. Inside the concrete pit, the killer had left the bodies of two missing women, Marina, who had now been missing for 18 months, and Ludmila, who had disappeared 4 weeks ago. Just like the maniac's other victims, Marina and Ludmila had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The Danilovsky Maniac had killed at least 6 girls and women in less than 2 years, and police felt that they were no closer to catching him. Then, once again, the crimes suddenly stopped. After 2 years of radio silence, the killer returned on the 11th of June 2007. He abducted 17-year-old Natalia Zakalova, who was walking to meet her parents at the banks of the river. She called her parents and told them that she was 2 minutes away, but she never arrived. When Natalia's parents tried to call their daughter, they noticed that her phone had been turned off and notified the police. When the news broke that another young girl had disappeared, the public and the police both began to worry that the Danilovsky Maniac had returned. A search of the area revealed no signs of Natalia, but investigators discovered that she had been abducted when she was less than 20 meters away from her parents. 1 week later, her remains were found at a nearby park. Investigators might not have found any physical evidence at the site of Natalia's abduction, but they did find something that they'd been looking for years: detailed eyewitness descriptions of the attacker. Multiple people noticed a man close to where Natalia had been abducted, stating that he was middle-aged, short, with a stocky build, and short brown hair that was going gray. Some of the details varied between eyewitnesses, but they all agreed on one thing: the killer had extremely unsettling eyes that were clouded in appearance. As soon as this description reached the media, a new nickname for the killer was born: the dull-eyed maniac. After Natalia's murder, there were no signs of the maniac. At first, the authorities believed that he was just taking another short break from the killing, and they anticipated a new victim in a month, or 6 months, or 2 years. There were several false leads: a man who had dragged 2 girls into the bushes in Cherepovets, and a man who looked similar to the composite sketch had murdered his ex-girlfriend, but DNA testing revealed that both cases were unrelated. Then, in November of 2011, there was a murder that strongly resembled the maniac's crimes. 19-year-old Svetlana Filyuk asked her boyfriend to pick her up, but when he arrived at the location she'd given him, there was no sign of her. The following year, her body was found behind an abandoned building, covered with leaves and dirt, similar to the way that the maniac had covered Tatiana's body in an attempt to hide it. Despite these similarities, police never officially counted this one as the maniac's victim. In late 2022, investigators made another appeal to the public and released 3 new images related to the case. 2 of the images were composite sketches of the killer, but the third was a real photograph of an unknown man who the police suspected might be the Danilovsky Maniac. It showed a middle-aged man with graying hair, wearing a beige jacket and blue pants, standing next to a body of water. The authorities believed that the maniac would have found it impossible to stop committing his crimes. If the murders have truly stopped, he is most likely either in prison or dead. And if he is still alive, he might have fled the country or changed his MO. But wherever he is, no doubt he is still searching for his next victim. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the podcast today. And normally this time is where I would let you know you need to subscribe or share the podcast with your friends and family, and maybe say something funny here or there, but I'm not going to do that today. This podcast episode will be released at or around Thanksgiving of 2023, and that may not be when you're listening to it. However, I would like to take this time, instead of doing that self-serving thing that I normally do at this time, and recognize the life and now death of the biggest, maybe, in the entire country's existence of mental health awareness, and that's Rosalynn Carter. Even before she was Jimmy Carter's wife, she was on the side of mental health awareness. She had a family member suffering from a mental health illness, and he scared her just because he was different. And instead of moving on from that and moving past it and going on with her life, she used that to help others with mental health from a very young age. She made Jimmy Carter promise when he was the governor to implement the best mental health awareness organization within the state of Georgia. And he did that. When Jimmy Carter became president, she could have sat back and just been the first lady. But she didn't do that either. She helped found the Carter Center, which is a non-governmental organization that is devoted to improving lives, and specifically the lives of people suffering from mental illness. She was a mental health activist from the 1970s on up until she died last weekend. She's done so many amazing things to help, and doesn't get the recognition I think that she deserves as being one of the pioneers of mental health awareness in this country. In the show notes of this episode, I'll leave a link to the Carter Center, and you can go there and learn more about what I'm talking about right now. Or you can just go to cartercenter.org. All right, that's going to do it. That is your episode for today. Thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.